Making. My name is Kamil Szymański. I'm a tech lead at Pragmatic Coders. And today I'd like to present a talk that will require a bit of your involvement. Otherwise, we're going to have an awkward moment of silence throughout the presentation. And the goal of this presentation is to kick off the improvement process for the decision-making processes that we are having. Architectural decision-making processes or any other important decisions that we make. And by talking about processes, I do not mean formal processes. I'm rather thinking about the ways we approach problems, how we tackle them, what things we evaluate, what questions do we ask. And the idea is to show you how different approaches can lead to different decisions being made. We're gonna go 3 times throughout the same example, simple, well-known example. And I will start by taking a really shallow approach to making architectural decision. It's just to show you one end of the spectrum, the one that you most probably, I believe, that you won't do in the real-world project. However, I'd like to show you one end of the spectrum, and then we will gonna have a time-bound exercise when you will evaluate the same example. So prepare a pen and a pencil, a piece of paper, or mobile if you wish, to take some notes, note down the things that you care about in this example. And the idea is that after that, I will go through what we could or should evaluate. And at that part, you should take a look what you missed in your evaluation part. You will miss most probably a lot of things because this is really time-bound. So during those few minutes, you won't get everything because time is limited. It's, first of all, because of we're really limited in time in terms of the presentation time, but also to simulate the real-world conditions where we are always late in the projects, the time is ticking, we're always in a rush. And after that, you could take a look at what you have missed and what you really care about in those things that you've missed. So I believe that after this presentation, if you go once more through this example, if you evaluate the same thing in your own context for your own problem once or twice, you will be able to really improve your decision-making processes, because this will make visible the spots that you usually take for granted and do not evaluate. And having said that, I need to make a few disclaimers. First of all, we're gonna make huge simplifications. And the other one is that although we're gonna make a few decisions today, we will mention some technologies, do not focus on them at all. Just ignore them. The decisions, the technologies, they do not matter. What matters is the path that leads us to those decisions. So focus on why are we taking some decisions, how we are going to make those decisions, what things we evaluate. And let's start with setting the scene for today. So let's imagine that we are working for a company that is providing some software as a service offering, and this offering comes in 2 flavors. First is the plain old API version, API offering, so that our customers, if they want to make their own customers use this offering, they need to build some UI on top of it, integrate with that. And the other offering that we have is a slightly more expensive one, but comes with the UI, all the tweaks there, and the customers can just take it out of the box, brand it, put their own logo, company name, or whatever, and let their own customers use it almost out of the box. We also have a mobile version somewhere on the roadmap, but we haven't yet started working on it. And from all of the customers that we have, most of them use the full-fledged version of our product, so web plus all the APIs. But we still have some customers that are using the plain API version of our offering. It's 2018, so of course we're running everything in the cloud. There's microservices there. And to make this example simpler, let's assume that it's HTTP everywhere. So we're integrating over REST HTTP protocol. And then at some point in time, there comes a new requirement to add API versioning to the platform. Does it sound familiar to you? Has anyone gone through this exercise before? So this is the problem or challenge that we're gonna tackle today. And we're gonna go through that 3 times, as I've said. So the first approach will be a really, really shallow one to show you how bad it can be. I won't go through what problems it causes, because later on when we do the holistic approach, I think it's gonna be self-evident. So right now I'll only go through how it can be approached. And API versioning is a common problem, so there should exist a common solution to that. And the easiest way to find those common solutions is to just Google for that. And if we take a look at the first page of the Google results, we'll learn that there are a couple of solutions that we could choose from. We could version our API using resource path, query parameter, media type, or some custom header. And after such finding, there's a bit of lengthy, bloody, sweaty discussions, after which we settle on some solution. There will be plenty of arguments. Some of them will be valid that, like, for example, query parameter, it's probably not the solution for the 21st century because it's mixing the parameters of the query with the specification of the version to be used. But there will be also a lot of subjective arguments like this is not RESTful enough, it's not my flavor of being RESTful. And this is a really, really shallow approach to taking a decision. And I do not mean shallow by saying that on the second page of the Google results, you will learn that you can also version by using a subdomain. What I'm thinking about saying that this is a shallow thing is that we immediately jump to the solution space and we choose whatever solutions we find without any thought given to the problem at hand. So we do not evaluate problem space at all. We do not check what the context is, what are the limits, what problem are we trying to solve. And having said that, I would like you to go through this example, having 3 minutes. So we'll time bound it to write down the questions that you would ask, the things that you would evaluate the solutions or the problem against. Just write down simple questions, things that you would focus on, so that later on you will be able to discover what things matter to you and which things you focused on. So, having said that, there's gonna be an awkward 3 minutes of silence, unless you participate, so please do the part and yeah. Okay, I hope you're good because we're close to the time running out of this time-bound exercise. So I would like to move to the next part where I will show you the other end of the spectrum. We will evaluate a lot of things. All of them are valid. Not all of them are always necessary. It's up to you to decide which ones are and which aren't, because this depends on the context. But what I would like you to pay attention to is what you have noted down and what's not in your notes. And if something is not in your notes, just check out whether this is something that you really care about, because not everything here you might care about, but there might be some things that you find really, really valuable, and those are the things that you should focus on later on when you make your own decisions, because those are usually the spots that we take for granted and leave out of the picture, and they usually make a real difference. So, having said that, the first thing we should do is jump into the problem space, not the solution space. It's not only because knowing the problem at hand will lead to the better solution, because we'll make more informed decision. It's also because we need to check whether we really need to apply any solution. Because adding API versioning to our platform is adding additional complexity to the platform, so it needs to be justified. There needs to be a reason for this additional complexity landing in our software. It might be that it's not needed, or it might be that it's needed, but it's too costly to be done, and it might be easier to just skip it or do that by hand. Probably not the solution for API versioning, but a lot of times there are things that are important, but they happen so rarely that it's easier to do that manually instead of doing that in our software. So the first and most important question that we should ask is why? Why we are adding this complexity to our software? What problem are we trying to solve? And we can answer these questions from two perspectives, from our client's perspective and from our the development team perspective. So from the client side perspective, it's the client do not want to build their own solution on unstable fundamentals. No one wants to work with third-party snapshots. So I would say that it's to a large extent justified to add this API versioning. Otherwise, we'll lock ourselves in being unable to evolve our API. And this is our perspective. Because if we want to evolve our API and sometimes break things, we need to have mechanisms for that. And API versioning is one of those mechanisms. Otherwise, whatever decision we make, if it turns out not to be the best decision or good decision a couple of months or years later, we will be able to revoke that decision. Without API versioning, we're basically stuck with any wrong decision that we make. But it's not only about asking ourselves why, but also what. What do we want to version? Because there are a lot of APIs. There will be, for example, public, exposed, published APIs, the ones that are visible to the client, the ones that are outside of our area of control, and there are also internal APIs, the ones that we use within our platform to communicate between microservices or services, if you wish. And although most probably we would like to have the same solution for both of those challenges, it might be that not necessarily this is the best idea. We need to ask this question and evaluate that. And it's not always, it's not only about what, why, where, but also some questions really specific to the problem at hand. For example, for API versioning, we need to say how granular we want to version our APIs. Do we want to expose the whole platform, whole API under a single version? Or do we want to expose every context under a different version? From the client perspective, It's usually way better to have a single API version for that because they are using just a software as a service. They do not care whether we, under the hood, have a payment context, order context, customer context. But if we grew really big, let's take AWS Amazon, for example. Versioning the whole Amazon under a single version, it would be really limiting to the Amazon. Every release will require a lot of communication, so they would probably need to slow down. So it's easier to version, for example, the queuing services, blob storage, databases, virtual machines under different versions. So this is really context specific, and we also need to take such things under consideration. And we should also think about where should we put this API versioning. Because even if we think that this is important, it's not necessarily a thing that we need to put directly into our software. We need to put it into our platform, but it can be maybe on some API gateway level. We need to check what the context is, because we have a lot of APIs. We have plain APIs used by clients, but we also have a web application, which might be using a different API, or there might be a different API gateway for the sake of deploying web application. In the future, there will be a mobile application, so it might be a different API or different API gateway. What we might also take into consideration is whether there is some middle tier between the web application and our API, or mobile application and our API, just to authorize the requests. This is the part about learning context. And as you have seen in the first example, we completely skipped that. We immediately jumped to the solution space without any thought given to the problem space, which is really important because it says what scope we need to apply our solution, whether we need to apply it at all, and what are the constraints of that. And another thing that is usually being skipped, who has in their notes testing support? Not a lot of hands. This is a really important thing. Testing should be a first-class citizen. And usually, this comes as an afterthought, after we've made the decision. And by testing support, I do not mean that we have a fluent builder to make requests. This is a good thing to have it, but the more crucial thing is being able to, for example, test multiple API versions at the same time. Thinking about how much effort, how much hassle is involved when we release a new API version. Do we need to take all the tests and copy them or modify them? Or is it just a single property change? What happens when we deprecate API version? Do we need to remove tests? How much hassle, how much effort it takes? And after that, we can start moving towards the solution space. So it's a good time to do a quick proof of concept, to take a look at what's in the market, how our current tech stack supports that problem. Is it supported out of the box? Is the out-of-the-box solution really solving our problem? Or it might be that there is a better solution that requires only a few tweaks, not hacks, but few easy tweaks to solve our problem. This is also the part to take a look how much maintenance burden those solutions comes with. Who has maintenance in their notes? 1 hand, 2 hands, 3. So not a lot, and this is a really important thing because we will live with that for really long time, maybe till the end of the project. And having said that, we have 5 solutions that can be applied to this problem. Which one should we choose? Frankly speaking, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that much, because what matters is not on the picture. Like, of course, some of those solutions will be better, some will be worse, but what matters lies beneath the surface. And those are things like, for example, versioning scheme. We need to think about how we will version our software. For example, Is semantic versioning a good solution for that? It's good for libraries, probably not for APIs, because we might end up having to support multiple plethora of API versions at the same time. So we might run into huge maintenance problems. And talking about the versioning scheme, there's a more important thing to define. It's the scope of versioning. What is the version, first of all? We can say that the version is some kind of a contract that takes into account inputs, outputs, and response codes. This is not enough. We need to define when the contract change. For example, breaking changes, they should result in the releasing of new API version. But what if we are making changes that are not non-breaking? What if we, for example, make a required field an optional field? Or if we add additional payload in the response? Do we then release a new API version? Do we release a new API version when we add new endpoints to our APIs? What happens if the behavior changes? Let's say, for example, today I'm 16 and I'm able to register in the platform. And tomorrow, new regulations come into play and I'm no longer allowed to register. Does this impact the API version? Probably not, but it's really worth to define that, to ask this question and to answer that. And it's not the end of the story. We need to take a look at it from the client standpoint. We need to, for example, define what is our deprecation policy. When do we deprecate a version, and how long do we support it? And it's not enough to say, oh yeah, we will support it for 2 months. If our clients have a quarterly release schedule, or they release their software every half a year, they will just go to the different provider. So we need to check what are the requirements and the context of our clients. We also need to think about documentation. How do we document our APIs and how we provide our clients with this documentation? It might be that Swagger in IT is a common standard, but if we are in the field where there's a defined way of documenting APIs, it might be that some solutions are out of the question. Like, for example, the query parameters are not supported for that standard, and the clients are used to that. It's a standard in their industry. We also should think about how we will allow clients to use the upcoming API changes, to see that, to test that. And we also need to take a look at it from the different perspective, from what we require from the clients. Because the API versioning requires 2 parts to participate. First of all, it's us, the provider, but also there's the consumer of this API. And the consumer needs to specify what version they want to use. And the tricky part, often forgotten, is to specify what happens if they do not. What happens if they don't provide the version? Do we error out? Do we use some default version? If we error out, do we error out straight away? Like, let's say tomorrow I will release this API versioning. Do I start erroring out tomorrow? Or do I give customers some grace period, some transition period, so that I will error out, but for the first quarter, I will use the default version, which is the one that is today's version. We also need to think what happens if the client provides the wrong version. The one that doesn't exist was removed. What happens then? Do we error out? How do we error out? What are the response codes? What happens if the version they specified is an existing, valid version, but the payload they are sending, it's not fulfilling the contract of that version? So let's say I want to use the version 3 of the API, but the payload is not updated by me, so I'm sending the payload of the API of version 2. What happens then? And as you can see, there's a plethora of things that we need to evaluate. And it's easy to forget every question, every answer here. It's easy to even forget what the decision was. So the crucial part is to document everything that we talked about, to keep some decision log within our platform, to document what decision we made, what was the scope and the goal of that decision, what is the status of that decision, because we might take this decision today, because it's a good solution for today, but tomorrow, the context, the requirement, they may change. So we might render ourselves with the good decision for today, but not so good for tomorrow. So we might want to revoke that decision or change it afterwards. So we should also say what is the status of this decision. If we make a decision, we need to document why exactly this one decision was made, what other solutions we evaluated, what criteria we evaluated it against, what trade-offs were required to be made when we took that decision. And it's not only about documenting the decision itself, it's also providing some documentation to help us later on, to document when we are releasing a new API version, when we are deprecating it, what are the consequences, what are the steps required to do that. Here we should also attach the code samples from this proof of concept. We should provide the samples of how to version API in our stack, because it's easy to say, yeah, we're gonna use media type header for API versioning. How do you do that on your tech stack? Is it a single annotation? Is it a filter? Is it some more involved solution? There should be code samples for that so that it's applied in the same way for all our platform. And this is not the end. Those are the things that I thought about. For sure, I have missed some. And later on, I will show you the list of things that we evaluated. But right now, I would like to go into the part of putting some comments and suggestions out in the air and enumerate some low-hanging fruits. So first of all, the context is a king here. We're not Google's, Netflix's, Twitter's. And by saying that, I do not mean that we are smaller, worse, or different in any way. It's that even if we are building a search engine, we are not Google. We are not Google because our customers will be different. Our business needs will be different. Our solutions will be different. Our tech stack will be different. So whatever works for Google might not work for us. So of course, we should pay attention to how they are doing that, but we also need to verify how it applies to our context. Is it solving our problems? Do we have those problems at all? The solutions that are good for them might not be solutions that are good for us, and vice versa. We should really, really start from learning the problem first, and only then thinking about the solution that is to be applied. Now, this will be really, really generic, but it's worth to keep that in our heads. Whatever we decide on, we should take a look at how pleasant it is to use. How pleasant it is to use from client's perspective, but also from our perspective. To use, to test that, to maintain that. Testing and maintenance are the things that we usually do not focus on when making those decisions. And this can be a real game changer. And whatever decision we make, we should strive for limiting the complexity that it adds to our platform. But still, we need to stay pragmatic. It's not for taking the most simplistic decision, the simplest solution. It's really tricky to answer this question, what is the good, the best decision at all? Is it that decision that has the most pros and least cons? Probably not. We need to also take a look at the short and long-term gains and costs, risks attached to that. Two really important things to the notion of the best decision are how easily and how cheaply is this decision reversible. If it turns out not to be the good decision, or if it's a good decision today, but not the best one tomorrow, how easy, how tricky, how risky it is to revoke from that decision. Maybe the decision that has the most pros is not necessarily the best decision because it completely omits this point. And if we are making the decision, let's give ourselves room for making mistakes. So do not limit our options in the future. If we can build something on top of that, or change it in some ways, it's better than to have this static, set in stone thing to follow. Also, if we can put some number against this decision, the hypothesis that we are trying to prove, it's really good because then, after some time, we can verify whether we took the right decision. The number will clearly set whether it was a good or wrong decision. It's way better than a gut feeling. Yeah, it looks like we solved the problem. We really need to take that into account. And this is not enough. We also need to think about time. Like for example, the study that we did today, we did that during half an hour, only because it was prepared. In real world, it takes days or even longer. And such an extensive study is not always necessary and not always possible, because sometimes we just need to put things in motion. Lead time really matters. Sometimes making any decision, even the wrong one, is way better than making no decision at all. We need to think about it. And all of those decisions, they come with the cost. A lot of decisions, most of them, require a lot of meetings or a lot of talking. And this is a huge cost. It takes time, and not the time of a single person, but usually few or a lot of persons. So let's try to keep those costs at minimum. The easiest way to do that is to do as much as possible asynchronously. If there's a meeting needed, let's have it. But let's do the parts that we can do asynchronously. Let's do that over some wiki page, for example. It's easier to comment something, having time, not being in a rush. Being able to comment every question that pops out. It's way, way cheaper, and it also gives us time to think about the question to ask and think about the answer to give to that question. And if a meeting is needed, have a clear goal of it, specify that goal. If this is the single goal, the better. But we can have a few goals or few points in the agenda. Have an agenda published for that meeting. And if we make any decisions there, if we discuss any important facts there, document them, send them, do some minutes from the meetings. And the really, really simple thing that we usually do not do is to come prepared to those meetings. Read that wiki page that was published, but also give people time to prepare for that meeting. It's not okay to publish the wiki page right now and schedule a meeting half an hour later on. No one will have time to read it. Give people a day or two to read that, to comment that, to see what are the pain points. Are there any spots that we left behind? Looking at the comments made to those articles, we might see that the solutions, for example, that we proposed, they make no sense at all, or that there's a huge area that we haven't covered. And having said that, this is the list of the things that we discussed today, the questions we asked, the things we evaluated. I would like you to compare those to the notes that you've made during the exercise and see what you have left behind. And it's okay to leave something behind, because not always such an extensive study is required. But if there's something that you really care about and you've missed that, this is the thing that you should pay attention to the next time you will make some decision. I would really recommend you to do the same exercise for the problem that you have at hand right now in your own context, and to do that on your own with your team and see what areas you really care about and you take for granted, you skip it. Because with this, you will be able to nail down the things that you usually skip and that lead to taking not fully informed decision. And if you are to remember just a single thing from this presentation, it's this one. Do not jump to the solution straight away. First, take your time, postpone the solution. Do not jump to code to conclusion. First, learn the problem space, learn the context, learn the constraints. Ask those simple questions, ask why, where, how, when, and only then try to assess the technology, the solutions. And I hope that this is a useful thing for you. I hope that you will follow it up and improve your decision-making processes, because the better our thinking processes, approaches to solving the problems, the better decision we will make. And with that, I would like to open up to questions, if you have any. Okay, I see one hand. Do we have a mic?
Where I should go? Okay.
By the way, have you spotted how that we didn't focus on the thing that we usually fight the most, whether to use the resource path versioning or media header? That was just a small portion of the whole story. We usually skip the most important part.
Hello. I
Hi.
would like to ask which type of versioning is the most frequent in your company? Because you said that some solutions are better, so you analyze it many times. So which is the most frequent?
The most frequent, I don't know. Usually on the market you will find all of them. Maybe besides the domain versioning, because it's the most expensive one in terms of testing and supporting, but for sure there are a couple of companies using that. I started by saying that query parameter might not be the solution for the 21st century, because it's mixing the query parameters with API versioning specification. There are companies and big companies using that. Maybe that's Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Like, do not pay attention to what is the most commonly used solution. Pay attention to what works in your context and what are the requirements. It will be a bit different if you care more about the client's changes on the client side or not. Maybe it's easier to add a query parameter than to modify the path to the resource. It might be that some customers will say, oh, it's not RESTful enough, so it will be bad, so we won't use you as a provider, we will go to some competition. There's a plethora of things to evaluate. So we're using the we're using the media type versioning, but it works in our context. It might not work in your context. So don't look at us, don't look at any other companies. Are there any other questions? Okay, I see none. So thank you for your attention, for taking part in that, and I wish you a great rest of the conference. Thank you.